Mr. Will Richardson to the District 230 today. As a parent of two teenagers, Will has spent the last dozen years developing an international reputation as a leading thinker and writer about the intersection of social and online learning networks and education. He is one of a handful of original education bloggers, and his work has appeared in numerous journals, newspapers, and magazines, such as Leadership, District Administration, Education Week, the New York Times, and the English Journal. He is an outspoken advocate for change in schools and classrooms in the context of the diverse learning opportunities that the web and other technologies now offer. A former public school educator for 22 years, Will is a co-founder of Modern Learning Media and co-publisher of modernlearning.com, which is a site dedicated to helping educational leaders and policymakers develop new contexts for new conversations around education. Over the past 8 years, he has spoken to tens of thousands of educators in over a dozen countries about the merits of online learning networks for personal and professional growth. Please welcome our keynote, Mr. Will Richardson.
Good morning. How you doing? I hope this isn't a metaphor for this presentation, right? The sinking ship, we'll see. It's great to be with you today. Thanks very much for having me. I'm going to start this presentation hopefully by engendering your love of, this is me with Ernie Banks. Ernie was my hero when I was growing up in Chicago. I was here until I was 11 years old. And I hear this might be the year, right? Is that right? Oh, we'll have to see. We've been saying that. My dad died at 83 without ever having seen the Cubs win a World Series. And I hope I don't suffer that same fate. I hope I make it to 83, but I hope I also watch the Cubs win a World Series. So look, I have about 45 minutes. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. I'm here this morning to challenge you. I'm hopefully going to challenge you in ways that make you think, maybe get you a little bit uncomfortable. But I think that at the moment that we're in education, considering all the technologies that we have, and I know you guys are building out a lot of technology initiatives, and your kids are probably carrying a lot of technology, that it's important for us as educators to begin to develop a different context around what that technology looks like, what we can do with it, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are. And so at the end of this 45 minutes, hopefully you'll leave here maybe with more questions than answers, but also hopefully you're going to leave here inspired to think differently about the potentials of technology in your classroom, because I think this is a really amazing, amazing time for us to be learners, whether we're my age or the students in your classroom's age or whatever age, to be honest with you. It's been 25 years since the first one-to-one laptop rollout at Methodist Ladies College in Australia. And when you think about that, a quarter century of kids with technology in schools, I think you have to ask, what's changed? And the answer to this, the short answer to this, I think, is not much. I've had the real pleasure of being able to go to lots of different schools in lots of different parts of the world where I've seen lots of technology being implemented. But mostly what I've seen are beautiful digital worksheets that are being delivered on the iPad, Pearson digital textbooks that are being read on those devices. Really, we haven't used technology in classrooms in very interesting or transformative ways that really take advantage of what those technologies can do. I think we're at a point now, though, where we have to really ask why change. So this is still what technology looks like in a lot of schools, where you go there in labs. It's not something that's seen, again, in very powerful ways. I think we have to ask now why change, and this is why we have to change. Because this is kind of what the world looks like. I have two teenagers, and not that my home looks like this all the time, but certainly the devices that they have and the access that they have has changed a lot about how they learn and about how they connect. And this is the reality of our world right now. Whether we like it or not, whether we in this room are comfortable with it or not, whether we use technology to the extent that our kids use it, this is what it looks like. This is Pew research from last week, this new report that just came out. 92% of teens go online daily. About a quarter of teens use technology constantly, and I own one of those teenagers who does that. And that kind of begets some really interesting conversations in our household about how much is too much and you know, what you should be using that stuff for. 75% of kids have access to a smartphone, and these numbers are just going up. And this number especially is interesting because so much more content, so much more stuff that we do now is being formatted for the phone. I have a Galaxy Note, which is kind of a bigger footprint than the old iPhone. My kids both have iPhones, and I look at it, and it feels very small to me, the screen anymore. And I think actually we're probably going to get a little bit bigger than this because we want to carry this device around with us. We don't want to lug it around with us. And so more and more stuff is going mobile. And it's a different kind of space that we're in, but we don't really think about learning too much when we think about technology. We think about, especially in kids, we think about socializing. We think about sharing stuff. We think about getting in trouble and doing stupid things. The reality of it is we can do a lot of learning with the devices that we're carrying around in our pockets right now. And I want to start with this quote by Seymour Papert. And I think it's a really, really truthful quote. I think in education we do have kind of two sides of the brain when we think about learning. We think about learning in the context of what happens in classrooms, which is pretty much of a traditional narrative that learning happens through some teaching, some delivery of content or curriculum, that there are basically pacing, you know, there's a pace to learning, there's a sequence to learning, it's very linear in a lot of cases. But yet, when we think about learning in our own lives, it doesn't look like that. Most of us in this room don't learn in a classroom. We don't learn from one particular teacher. We don't learn something in very linear ways, or it's messier. It doesn't take the shape and form that it does in classrooms very much. And we kind of know this as educators. We know that what happens in classrooms really doesn't reflect how learning happens outside of classrooms. But now I'm going to make the case that that difference is becoming even more acute. Now, in education, for some reason, we have this fetish to modify the noun. We talk about all these different types of learning, flipped learning, and cooperative learning, and personalized learning, whatever else. I think for some reason we're afraid to just deal with learning. Because at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. Our kids either learn something or they don't. We either learn something or we don't. It doesn't really matter how we get there. But what we have to focus in on is what are they learning? What are they really learning? And how do we define learning? How do we define it? What is it? If I had the time, I would ask you this question, and I would ask you to talk about it. And if you're anything like other teacher audiences that I've spoken to, this is a complex answer. It's not easy. It's not something that we can kind of sum up in a sentence or two. And different people have different ideas of what learning really is. But I think that Seymour Saracen, who wrote a book called And What Do You Mean by Learning, has a great answer to it that I want to at least put out there for your consideration this morning, and that is that productive learning, when we really learn something deeply and powerfully, it really engenders wanting to learn more about whatever it is we're learning. And he says that absent wanting to learn more, the learning really isn't productive. Now, I have these conversations with my kids on a fairly regular basis when they come home from school, and I don't articulate it like this, but I'm constantly kind of asking them, so what do you want to learn more about that you're learning in school? What is it that you want to go more deeply into? Because we have access to the web. We have access to all this information, all these resources. We can certainly go further than you're able to go in the classroom, which is kind of restrained by time and whatever else. Not much. There's not really much that my kids want to continue learning when they come home that they were learning about in the classroom. And on some level that bothers me. On another level, however, it doesn't mean that they're not learning about stuff. They're learning about the things that they want to learn about. They go deeply and powerfully into other areas that they're not covering necessarily in the classroom. They want to learn more about a whole bunch of stuff. My son, both of my kids are athletes. My son is actually a fairly good basketball player. In fact, when I leave here today, I'm going to Pittsburgh to watch him in an AAU tournament probably this weekend. A lot of fun that's going to be. And he wants to learn more about basketball. He wants to learn more about getting quicker, about adding speed and agility. And so he's watching lots of YouTube videos. He's reading lots of stuff. My daughter is maybe the healthiest person that I know right now. She eats better than anyone that I know. And hopefully it's having some good effect on me as I eat a lot of the things that she's cooking. But she's self-taught around that stuff. It's something that she has access to that information, so she goes and basically learns it. So if we look at learning and really deep and powerful learning as those occasions when we want to learn more, and I think that probably resonates with most of you. If I asked you, what's the thing that you've learned most deeply and powerfully in your own lives, it's something that you continually want to learn more about, right? I mean, it's something that you continually are learning more about because you have an interest or passion to do so. So here's the fundamental question then for us: how do we help kids learn more productively in classrooms? How do we make that type of learning that happens now outside of classroom happen inside the classroom? Now here's Einstein, pretty smart guy, who said, I don't teach, I just create the conditions under which kids can learn deeply and powerfully in the classroom. That's it. I just create those conditions. Now again, if I had the time, I would ask you guys to talk about that. What are those conditions? What are the conditions for deep and powerful learning to take place? What is necessary to be there in order for us to learn in those ways? Well, I've asked that to lots of different teachers. And I bet you whatever's in your mind right now is probably on this list. It's probably up here. These are the conditions under which we learn most powerfully and deeply. And we may be able to argue about some of these on the edges, but pretty much it does require passion. It does require a real purpose. It does require agency and autonomy on our part, that we choose to learn, that it's our thing that we want to learn. It's not constrained by time. It's not constrained by a particular subject. It is about flow in many cases, that we get into those kinds of learning environments. So I think that this is a pretty representative list of the conditions that are necessary for us to learn in our lives. Then our question becomes this. So, which of those conditions exist in our classrooms? Now, this is a tough one, and this is a much tougher question to answer than the original one, which is what are the conditions? Now, again, I'm thinking of my own kids' classrooms, but I'm also thinking of the classrooms that I see on a fairly regular basis when I walk in. Generally, when I think about these conditions, which ones I see on a regular basis, it's not that many. In fact, I'd probably say it's these 5 that are most regularly apparent in classrooms. They're safe, they're social, there's a positive learning environment there, certainly there are teachers, there's feedback and mentors and things like that. But it's not always a classroom. I don't often see classrooms where kids have autonomy and agency over their learning, where they're choosing what to learn. I don't often see classrooms that aren't constrained by time. I don't often see classrooms where kids are doing real work for real audiences based on the things that they care about. Yet we all know that those are the conditions, those are the things that are required for us to learn really powerfully and deeply. So here's my point. My kids learn in different classrooms. So these are my 2 lovelies. These are, it's my son Tucker, who is 15, my daughter Tess, who's 17, and they're kind of doing Titanic here. It's kind of ironic. I think it's pretty interesting. They need to flip, she needs to be in front, he needs to be in back. But, and look, how many of you own 2 teenagers, by the way? Anything? Yeah, so, John said there was a support group for us at lunch. Because, this is one of the 7 or 8 pictures that I have of my kids where they're not arguing or not fighting. Now, here's their world, just so you understand. And look, my kids are privileged. They have a lot of access. And I know that not every child has access, but as you can see by those statistics, we're getting close to that point. And it's not even the divide so much between who has access and who doesn't. The divide now is who has access and really knows how to use it well versus those kids who have access and don't really know how to use it well. So here's the world my kids learn in right now. They have basically the sum of human knowledge in their pockets. There's almost not a question or an aspect of your curriculum in this school that isn't in my phone somewhere, if I know how to find it, if I know how to access it. They are carrying it around with them wherever they go. And yet, pretty much when we talk about this stuff in schools, we say you can't use that access. I'm a big advocate for open phone tests. Why wouldn't we have our kids take open phone tests? That's the way that they answer the questions in their real lives. Why wouldn't we help them do that really well in the classroom? They have access to 3 billion people. And look, by the way, I'm not saying there isn't a lot of crap in that picture. There is. And I'm not saying there aren't some people in this picture who want to do my kids harm. There are. This is complex. It's not simple. But they have access to a whole bunch of people who potentially share their passions and interests and who potentially can teach them. And they have access to a whole bunch of tools that are mind-boggling. Almost 2 million apps in the App Store right now. New devices on a daily basis. The Apple Watch. How many people are going to buy the Apple Watch? Come on, that's yeah, a couple people are. So, look, and again, there's crap in this picture too. There's all sorts of stuff that isn't really great. So, any Minecraft parents in the room? All right, we're going to have a support group too, right? So, if you're not familiar with Minecraft in education or in general, you probably should get familiar with Minecraft. So a lot of people are calling this one of the most impressive learning tools that's come about in the last 10 years, obviously, from technology. Here's the interesting thing about Minecraft. When it was released to the world about 7, 8 years ago, it was released with absolutely 0 instructions. No instructions at all. So people had to pretty much figure it out. And they have. If you want to learn how to use Minecraft, you should probably do what my son did when he first started. He went on YouTube and he watched 12 Minecraft videos on YouTube, 2 of which were in German, and he had no idea what they were saying, but he was just interested in watching the things that they were doing. He also then set up on my laptop the Uvu call. I don't know if you're familiar with Uvu, but it's like a kid's version of Google Hangouts, and he had about 5 of his friends on this call, and they were telling him how to do certain things in Minecraft because they were all together with him on my desktop computer, which was in Minecraft. They were on a server from Australia. They were running around mining and making stuff. If you're not familiar with Minecraft, the big deal, first thing you have to learn how to do is build fire. Because if you can't make fire, then the creepers come out at night and they eat you, and you have to start all over again. And it's kind of. So he's trying to learn fire, and they're trying to help him, and he's running around. And after 3 or 4 hours of his first session in Minecraft, when my wife and I were ready to pull the plug, we were like, okay, that's enough, right? We walked in, and not only had he learned how to build fire, but he had also been mining stuff, and he started to build a house, and he had these rooms, and he had stuff on the walls, and my wife and I were both like, wow, that's really kind of cool. He was constructing things, he was making things, he was collaborating. Okay, here's my point. He would have learned Minecraft in school like this. He would have taken the Minecraft class and given the Minecraft textbook, been told to read chapter 1 and do problem number 1 in the back, and then the next morning he would have brought his tree that he created for problem number 1, and they would have looked at the tree rubric, and he basically would have been told that if he wanted to create a chest in Minecraft, which is something really important so you can stow all the stuff you're mining, that you couldn't do that because that didn't come up until 2 weeks later in the curriculum. And I'm just telling you right now, he's not waiting for you any longer. He's not waiting for you. He's not waiting for your curriculum. He's not waiting for your course to learn the things that he wants to learn. He's learning them when he wants to learn them, because he wants to learn them in many different ways that don't look anything like the classroom. All of those conditions exist in my kids' classrooms, except maybe the safety one. The safety one is the one that's kind of scary for me, but I'm trying to make sure that my kids can keep themselves safe. But all of these conditions exist when they leave you, and they go home, and they begin to learn in these environments. And that now is becoming a real interesting phenomenon. Because this world of abundance of people, of information, and of tools changes the traditional narrative around learning. It challenges it in lots of different ways, and there is an increasing disconnect between the way we use and think about technology in schools and the way we use and think about technology in our lives, and in your kids' lives as well. In school, it's about standards, it's about answers, it's about artificial kinds of work that we do. It's contrived, if we're honest about it. Not very much of what our kids do lives outside of the classroom. It's about individual grades, it's about individual assessments, and it's very private. Yet, when you go online, it's about passion, it's about questions, it's about transparency. It's real work for the real world in many cases. It's very social. And again, there is a real interesting disconnect that's happening. Now, all of the surveys around student engagement, no matter where you are, the big surveys of 500,000 kids, show this to be the engagement, the percentage of kids who are engaged in school. And kids come to school really engaged. And by the time they get to high school, they're not so much engaged anymore. And I've lived this, to be honest with you. And it's painful. It's painful for me that my son basically is just doing school. And he does well. He's got like a 3.8. My daughter's going to graduate in June, hopefully, with like about a 3.8. But neither of them are invested in really what's happening in the classroom. And it's not about their teachers. They like their teachers a lot. They like their kids, their friends a lot. But it's about this kind of deadly curriculum that just marches on, regardless of whether or not they're interested or care about it or whatever else. They're just going to keep going through it because that's the narrative. That's what we say. And I don't think we can be okay with this any longer. I don't think we can be okay with 40% of our kids saying that they are engaged in high school. So this is a productive learning environment for my kids. And it's also a freedom to learn that gets taken away from them every time they walk into school. By policy, by history, by whatever, we tell them you cannot learn like that in here. When you walk through the doors, you have to stop learning the way that you learn with technology. You have to start learning in a very different way. By the way, this is our freedom too. I don't know how many of you participate in social spaces. I don't know how many of you would label yourselves as learners in this kind of network world that we live in. It is powerful. I'm a poster child for it. It's where I've been learning now for about 15 years. And it's changed just about everything in the way I think about classrooms, teaching, education, because it is something that I find to be extremely powerful and a profound shift over the way that we think about learning in general. So, welcome to the most disruptive moment ever in education. This is not what you signed up for. You did not sign up to go into teaching at a time when kids can learn your entire curriculum pretty much if they want to pass the test outside of the classroom. Because they could go to, my daughter basically passed physics with a C because of Khan Academy. Because she watched physics videos over and over and over again until she finally got them to the point where she, and we had a party the day she got a C in physics. But it is an amazing time to be a learner. Can you imagine a better time to learn? I can't. With all the access that we have, with all the stuff that we have at our fingertips, I can't imagine there's been a better time to be a learner. Look, I don't want schools to go away. And I don't think schools are going to go away. I think schools are going to be changed by this stuff. Because this basically challenges the fundamental premise that you have to be somewhere at some time with someone to go through a particular set of curriculum in order to learn something. That's the world that was in existence in 1894 when the Committee of 10 basically wrote your curriculum. That's the world that existed up until about 15 years ago. Really, it's the world that existed up until about 5 years ago, when we really got social about all this stuff. And it fundamentally challenges what we do. Absolutely. I don't want the same education for my kids that I had. It looks too similar, and I'm old. I mean, I got a text message from my daughter the other day. She got a 10 out of 10 on her multiple choice oceanography quiz. And I'm like, really? Really? It still looks like that? Because that's exactly the type of stuff that I was doing, so many years ago. Look, learning with technology is not an option. Show me any scientist in the world that isn't using technology. You can't find one. And show me any business person, anybody who's a professional these days who doesn't use technology as a core function of their work. You can't. It's very difficult to find that any longer. Yet we don't make technology a core piece of the learning that happens in school. It's on the edges. It's on the fringes. And, my son yesterday said, my teachers think they're being really, really interesting around technology when they say, today we're going to take the computers out of the lab, out of the carts, and we're going to create PowerPoints. That's not a very interesting or transformative use of the technology. But that's a lot of what it looks like. And the reason a lot of this is difficult for us is because our practice is behind the curve. And I think we have to be honest about this. This has happened very quickly in the last 10 years. And it's very difficult for us to keep up with what's happening in a learning context. But let me give you some examples of some people who aren't behind the curve. Here's Nick Rubin, 16 years old, who was in political science class one day, and basically they were talking about campaign finance reform, which he found really interesting, and he wanted to learn more. He started reading all sorts of stuff, but as happens with the curriculum, campaign finance reform had the test, and they moved on to something else. He wanted to keep going. So, to his credit, he went and he learned how to code. He went to Code Academy online, and he learned how to code. And then he created a Google Chrome extension. How many of you know what a Google Chrome extension is? Okay, so some of you do. And I use Google Chrome. So this extension basically sits on my browser, and it gives me information What he decided to do was create an extension so that every time you saw someone from Congress on a web page somewhere, you could highlight their name, mouse over it, and it would tell you all of the money that they received from special interest groups as you were reading that particular article. It would give you context at the moment so that you understood if Nancy Pelosi was voting for this particular transportation bill, well, here's all the money she got from transportation lobbyists. And that might have an effect on that, and you could go more deeply into it. He may be doing more about campaign finance reform than just about anybody else. Or Super Awesome Sylvia. Any Super Awesome Sylvia fans in here? Any of you know Super Awesome Sylvia? She's a geek. She walks around in a lab coat. She loves science. She absolutely loves science. As you can see, she's got a very popular YouTube channel. And basically, if there's anything maker-related, Super Awesome Sylvia will teach you how to do it in her videos. And she had this idea that she wanted to create what she called a watercolor bot, so that if you had an original watercolor, you could scan it in on your computer. You could hook your computer up to this watercolor bot, and the watercolor bot would replicate it. It would repaint it. Now, I don't know how many of us would want something like that, but she really wanted it, and she went on Kickstarter. How many of you have heard of Kickstarter? All right, so you guys know Kickstarter, which is a place where if you have an idea that needs a little bit of funding, you can go there instead of going to like an angel investor or whatever, and you can ask people like us to say, hey, would you give me 25 bucks? Would you give me 50 bucks? So she went on Kickstarter, asked for $50,000, within a month had $90,000 pledged. She created this Super Awesome Sylvia's watercolor bot, and now you can go to watercolorbot.com, you can order your kit for $2.95, comes to your door, you put it together, you hook it up to your scanner, you scan your watercolor, and all of a sudden you get a second original of your watercolor using Super Awesome Sylvia's watercolor bot. Kind of cool. By the way, you can buy her latest book on Amazon too. And Jack and Draka, which I'm sure some of you have probably heard about Jack. This is the part of the presentation where I'm reminded what losers my own children are. This kid basically decided that he wanted to come up with a test for pancreatic cancer and other types of cancers that would be much cheaper, much faster, whatever else. I'm going to play you a little bit of this video, and then you can get a sense of what Jack's about.
Most people play basketball outside of school or like some other sport, and I don't. I go here every day after school and do cancer research. My name is Jack Andrenka, and I'm 15 years old. What I've created here is an inexpensive method to detect pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, and lung cancer all in their early stages, where you have possibly over 50% survival rate. Okay, so here's what we have here. This is all the test strips I have. So compared to the current gold standard, my sensor is 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than the current standard. It costs only 3 cents, it takes 5 minutes, meaning that this could be used really in every doctor's office, and you could really use it every single week, and it would cost you maybe $1.56.
All right, so no big deal. But he says a couple things in this video just that I want to point out really fast. He says, number one, I could not have done this without access to the internet. I could not have done this without all the research that people had done before me so that I could learn from it and understand it. And the second thing he said, he tells a story where he says one day he had downloaded and printed out some of this research. He was reading it in his chemistry class when his chemistry teacher went over and, in his words, confiscated that piece of research because he was supposed to be working on an essay that he didn't really feel like writing on a particular day. Look, I hope this kid's an outlier, but those other kids, Nick and Sylvia and a whole bunch of other kids, those are kids in your school, without question. There are kids in your school who are doing really interesting things, really meaningful stuff, creating things, sharing them, working in the world, yet has nothing to do with school. And in none of these cases did any of this have to do really with school. They may have started there, but these are kids who are taking initiative and following the passions that they have. And why wouldn't we use technology in schools to help kids do meaningful, beautiful work that lives in the world? Why wouldn't we do that? That's our opportunity now. And kids can lead the way in a lot of it. Look, good learning has always been about passion and purpose and participation. It's always been about that. But now we have this thing. We have this thing called the web, and we have this access, and we have this stuff at our fingertips, and we have these tools that are powerful. And we can do interesting things. And it's a huge change. In 10 years, we've gone from a world of scarcity of information, knowledge, people, and technologies to a world of abundance of that stuff, and we are swimming in it, and it makes our heads hurt It makes our brains literally hurt when we think about how much is out there. But it's not an option. It's not an option. We can't close our doors to this. Almost they spend 1,000 hours a year in schools with us. They spend 4,000 hours with digital media. And we can have a conversation as to whether or not that's too much. Absolutely. We need to have a conversation as to whether or not that's too much. But this is the reality. And there are going to be 2 billion photos uploaded to the web today, almost. 2 billion photos, and my kids will take 7,000 of those. My kids, they live on Instagram and Snapchat. If you're looking for them on Facebook, they are long gone, by the way. And the reason they're long gone is because you're on Facebook. That's why they're gone. But they live in the world, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. My daughter, I love her to death. She made a really stupid mistake on Instagram. She posted something that wasn't malicious, wasn't a really bad thing, but something that could have been interpreted the wrong way, and go figure, it was interpreted the wrong way. Even though she took it down an hour after she posted it, someone had seen it, and she got in trouble, and it cost her 5 games from the basketball season. And I was in the, I thought I was going to make it through 4 years without being called in the principal's office, but I was in the principal's office with the principal who I knew really well. My daughter's sobbing and crying hysterically, and I'm going, 5 games, really? 5? And she goes, I only got to do 5 games. So she learned a lesson. But the interesting thing is, my daughter uses Instagram in really powerful ways too. Here's a picture of her right after they won the county championship with one of her assistant coaches, Coach Benelli, who told her, don't let the pressure of the moment overcome the pleasure of the moment. And he was a powerful influence in her life. And she posted this, and it brought tears to my eyes, based on what she'd written, based on just what is captured. And I made sure I sent this to the superintendent, to the principal, and the athletic director. And I said, I just want to make sure you understand that as stupid as she was in the first place, my kids use social media, my kids use these tools in some pretty powerful ways in their personal lives as well. Ask any journalist what it's like to be a journalist today as opposed to even 5 years ago. It's a different world. Ask any musician what it's like to try to start a music career today versus even 10 years ago. The world is changing because of this abundance, because of how much access we have. I don't need travel agents any longer. I don't need stockbrokers any longer. I don't need a whole bunch of people who I used to need, who are just these intermediaries that now I can basically do that work on my own. So just really fast, here's what it looks like. If you don't think that we have access to almost everything there is to know, I had a great-great-grandfather who grew up in Chicago, wrote really, really bad, terrible novels in the late 19th century. And he couldn't get them published, so he went to a vanity press here in Chicago and published 50 copies of a book called 8 Days Out, which if you have insomnia, I really, I suggest. It's terrible. It's about hobos riding on boxcars in the Midwest and running into bandits, all sorts of terrible things, right? 50 copies. I have one. Google's scanning every notebook in the universe. Do you know they scanned my great-great-grandfather's book? You can read it on Google. If you go to the Internet Archive, you can actually get a PDF. You can actually get a Kindle version of it if you want to put it on your phone. If you really, it's like better than any sleep drug you can find, I'm telling you. So just put it on your phone. When you can't sleep, you'll be out. 1895, 50 copies. His audience is now 3 billion people, potentially. People. How many of you read The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd? Remember that book? I taught that book in 2001 in my Modern American Literature class, 2002. We were probably the first school in the country to bring that book into our classroom. I figured, what the heck? I started a blog for my kids to read that book, and they were writing responses to questions. They were putting up artistic interpretations. They were having these interesting conversations, and I thought, well, what the heck? Let me see if maybe Sue Monk Kidd would be willing to come in to the blog and work with my kids as we read her book. She did. And my kids learned a lot more about that book from her than they did from me. I know you're shocked, but she knew a little bit more about the characters and whatever else. I also had journalism. My journalism kids were being mentored by professional mentors. One of my kids, Meredith Fear, wrote her feature story on why kids weren't reading as much news. She was being mentored by Scott Higgin, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Washington Post, who came into her blog when he was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, about a year after 9/11, and was commenting on her work. I think she learned a little bit more from him than she learned from me. And the tools. The tools are kind of crazy right now. I'm going to just apologize as I play this for the math teachers in the room. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to tell you this. I'm sorry. I don't think the math teachers are laughing right now. I think the rest of you are chuckling at this. The math teachers are like going, oh. Now, I'm just going to leave you with this question about that. Is that cheating? All right, moving on. So look, it's already here. This abundant stuff to information people and technologies, it's already here. I mean, we just may not be living in it, and that's a problem. Because the world is marked by ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous information, ubiquitous networks, and unlimited speed by everything, everywhere, anywhere, and all kinds of devices to make it ridiculously easy to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, publish, and raise your hand right now if you describe your school like that. Yeah, not so much. This is the reality that we're kind of working with. So here we go. We have this traditional learning narrative that says you have to be here for your time, all that kind of stuff. Parents are buying into that. We pretty much still buy into that because that's our experience. That was the narrative that we went through when we were in school. So it's comfortable to us. But now we have this modern learning narrative, which is more about this on-demand kind of self-paced, self-organized stuff that we can do. So in schools, it's about pretty much still about delivery of curriculum. You have a test that your kids have to pass, and you got to get through that particular curriculum versus discovery. I have a question. I need to get an answer. I need to make something. I don't know how to do it. I'll figure it out. It's the difference between consuming things in private versus creating things in public. It's the difference between what we want kids to learn versus what they want to learn. It's the difference between time and place, that you have to be here now, between August and June, or whatever your school year is, at these particular times, in this particular subject, with this particular age grouping, by the way, versus, look, I'm going to be on a plane, flying to Pittsburgh tonight. I'll have Wi-Fi. I'll be able to continue to learn, create, do all sorts of interesting things. It's just in case I need to know the 3 types of muscles that there are in the body when I'm at a cocktail party at some point when I'm 35 years old. I'm going to learn it in 6th grade or 7th grade whenever it comes up in the curriculum. Versus, hey, I need an answer. I need to figure that out. Can I find that answer? Can I basically, do I have the skills, literacies, and dispositions to go through and find that answer when I need it? So here's the reality. Our kids increasingly learn in a system of education that reflects a world that doesn't exist any longer. And look, I'm not throwing anybody here under the bus. This is simply the reality. The world outside of schools is changing dramatically and rapidly when it comes to learning. And it's just the reality that what we do, the functions and the structures and the systems that we use in schools does not reflect that reality any longer. So if this is everything there is to know in the world, if this is the sum of human knowledge, welcome to school. And that shelf pretty much was defined over 125 years ago. It hasn't changed very much. And by the way, let's not forget this. Curriculum is just a guess. That's all it is. It's just a guess as to what we think every child needs in order to be successful in their life. The guess hasn't changed much. We need to at least come up with a different guess. And as Seymour Papert said, now that we have access to everything, what billionth of 1% are we going to choose to teach in schools? How are we going to make that choice over what we now teach in schools? Who's to say that the very narrow, small little bucket of stuff is the right bucket any longer? I get why we chose the things we chose when we didn't have access. I totally understand it. It wasn't a bad choice. Is it still the relevant choice? And if these are all the people that potentially we can learn with in the world, then welcome to school. And please hear me say this, and I sincerely mean this. These people, you people, are extremely important in my kids' lives. I want my kids in classrooms with me. I want them to be inspired, to be motivated, to be pushed, to do great things by adults who care for them, and who are challenging them in great ways. But here's the reality. You can no longer be the only teachers in my kids' lives in this place. Because the reality of it is, there are other people outside the walls, Sue Monk Kids, Scott Haven, and many others, who might be able to teach my kids more, because their passions may align more, because their interests, you know what I'm saying. It's no disrespect at all to the people who are in the classroom, but the reality has changed. And if these are all the tools that there are in the world, we'll then walk into school where basically they're blocked, filtered. I go to places all the time where I can't read my blog because I'm a subversive of something, like I'm doing, social media or something. All right, but look, if you can get your brain wrapped around that, and I think you can, and that, we better be confused a little bit right now. We better be a little unsettled at the moment. The question we have to ask is, are we preparing kids for that? Are we preparing kids for a world where they have access to your entire curriculum in their pockets? Where they have access to so many different teachers with so many different passions, so many different tools to make? What's an education? I mean, really, what is it? And over the next 20 years, I'm convinced this is going to change. Because if we're going to keep defining an education as something that you go to a place to get, you get assessments, you get grades, you take tests, and then you are stamped as being educated, then basically what we're saying is that that and that and that don't count. Really? That's okay? That's not going to count? Because it didn't happen in class? Because someone didn't put a grade on it? Because it wasn't in the curriculum? That's not sustainable. I'm just going to tell you. That's not sustainable. Kids are doing amazing things. People are doing amazing things outside of the boundaries of the traditional structures. It's going to count. We have to find ways to make it count. What does every student need to know? I mean, seriously, does every single student need to learn the Pythagorean theorem? I mean, I'm picking on math teachers today, but you can fill in the blank. Shakespeare, I'm an English teacher. Shakespeare. I mean, does every single student, because you know as well as I do, 90% of what you learned in high school, you no longer know. You have forgotten. I could give you a quiz. I had a quiz, but just right before this I took it out because of the time. But you know what I'm saying. I could not pass the New Jersey math park test. There's no way. I would fail miserably. So, what does every student need to know? How must the purposes and practices of this place change to prepare kids for abundance? And what is the role of the teacher? And what skills and literacies and dispositions are now required? And by the way, how do we assess these things? Any of you have a test for curiosity, by the way? But yet you all want your kids to be curious. If your kids are not curious in the world of abundance, good luck. Good luck. If your kids are walking out here waiting for someone to tell them what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, and how they're going to be assessed on it, good luck to them. Seriously. Those kids are going to struggle. There's no question. So what is more urgent? Content, knowledge, or information? Or all these other things that happen to start with C? But you get my drift. But the problem here again is that these things are really hard to assess. As a parent, I go into Aspen, which is the grading system, and I look at my kids' grades. All I get is information on this, pretty much. I have no clue what's happening over here. None. And there's very little transparency around what my kids are doing. So unless I, hold them down on the floor and get them to tell me what's going on in class, I don't get a lot of feedback. I don't really see anything. I would love as a parent to see the things that my kids are doing, to see their work in the world, whatever else. So if we don't assess the things we value, we will end up valuing the things we assess. And welcome to the state of education in the United States, circa 2015. We value the things that we assess, and we assess these things because basically they're easy to assess. They're easy to assess. Now, you want transformation. There is a path, I think, to transformation, but I'm going to tell you right at the start, has nothing to do with technology. Here it is. If I asked you guys pretty much to put a dot on this little matrix as to where you are on the teacher-organized versus student-organized scale, I'm going to bet that most of you are still doing lesson plans. Right before this session started, I saw a number of people in your grading papers. You are organizing and assessing and probably taking care of most of that. And I'm betting, unless you're an outlier, that your curriculum makes it difficult for you to go deep because you have a lot to cover. that just when you think that you're ready to, you got to move on to something else. So I'm going to guess that most of you probably end up down here somewhere. You pretty much drive it, and you can't really go too deep because you just don't have the time. There's too much. In a world of abundance, we should be up here. If our kids do not have agency and autonomy in the classroom, if they have no opportunity to self-organize their learning, to ask their own questions, pursue their own interests and passions, and to go deeply into those things, respectfully, I would suggest we are not preparing them for the world they're going to live in. Because if you cannot self-organize, and if you don't know how to go deep, the persistence, the iteration, all the things that are required to go deeply into a topic and learn and become a master at something, you're not ready to live in a world of access. That's transformation. You want to transform things, that's where you start. You start by moving along in that continuum. And here's the deal. You all know how to do this. This is not about technology. It's about creating different conditions in your classrooms for kids to learn powerfully and deeply and do great work in the world. That's where it starts. It's a pedagogy and a mindset. But the cool thing is, if you have technology, then it gets really interesting. Because those conditions can be amplified in powerful, powerful ways by the technologies we bring into our classroom. But that is much more than handing in homework via the computer. It's much more than doing online tests. It's much more than just sharing information or whatever else. It's about creating, it's about publishing, it's about being transparent, and it's at its very essence about solving real problems with technology as opposed to without. So here's what's coming. Not these little Peruvian kids. They're not, coming over the border right now. What they represent. What they represent. And what they represent, 5 billion people with access by the end of this decade. 5 billion. And those people are going to be learners. There's no question. And those people are going to be connected, and they're going to be creating. And I really think that the next Marissa Mayer, the next Steve Jobs, is in that picture somewhere. I really do. I think that they are going to, in some form, change the world. There's no doubt about it. But here's the deal, and don't miss it. Those kids, those people, they're not going to stand for that. Not when they have access to that. You wouldn't either. And they're not going to stop at this when they have access to this. And you wouldn't either. You wouldn't either, given the choice. So, it's coming. I know that in my state, we had about 80% of kids opt out in particular schools. My son opted out. In New York State, 225,000 kids opted out of the state tests in the last 2 weeks. 225,000 kids. It's coming. They're not going to stand for it. And the parents aren't going to stand for it either. And I know that the reasons here are political and whatever else, but at the end of the day, it's going to be about learning. This change is going to come because of all that's available to them. And our kids need us to help them flourish. This is not something, a lot of people say, oh, they're digital natives, right? They're born into technology. They can use, it's crap. They're not. They need us. They need us to figure out how to use technology powerfully and deeply for learning in their lives. We can play a huge, important role in that. There's no question about that. They need us. But that means that we're going to have to think differently about our work. If we are simply focused on doing better on traditional measures and metrics year over year, that's not what we're talking about. We're going to have to be different. We're going to have to create more opportunities for kids to do things with technology, to learn with technology, to create, to publish, to solve problems, because those are the types of skills that they're going to need when they leave us. And learning is now the work. I look at my kids, their number one job for the rest of their life is to learn. People are not going to be giving them professional development. They are going to be expected to keep upskilling, to keep learning, to remaster and find new mastery on their own because they have access. There aren't going to be workshops and classes. They're going to be competing with people who are forging ahead on their own, and they're going to have those dispositions as well. And imagine what we could do. Imagine what we could do if we use technology in ways that allow kids to create and share and do amazing things. We should be doing that. So your big question is, can you help kids with this if you yourselves are not using technology to do that? And this is the really hard part. The really hard part. Because in order for us to bring those types of contexts to the classroom, we have to bring some practice to the classroom around that as well. And that has to be the focus of our work moving forward, is to showing mastery, becoming learners in these types of spaces so we can basically model that for us. So I'm going to invite you, as you have these discussions moving forward about technology, to be learners first and educators second, because while this is an extremely challenging time right now to be in education, it is also an amazing, amazing time to be a learner. And don't forget that in times of drastic change, learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will be beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. Thanks very much for your time this morning.
Great start to our Spring Institute Day, and thank you again, Mr. Will Richardson. Yes. Lots to think about there. And by the way, Mr. Richardson, we here in District 230 in the English world also teach and taught Secret Life of Bees. Just saying. It is now time, ladies and gentlemen, to move to session 1.